Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD page. This is a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I am a clinical neuropsychologist with a little over 40 years in the field, and I have an adult son who has ADHD. And today I'm going to do something a little different, presupposing the technology will agree with me. I'm a little late because I got tangled up with technology. Um, what I want to do today is if you are working with a child who has ADHD or a spouse who has ADHD, uh, or a neighbor for that matter, anybody you know who has ADHD, it is very helpful to kind of understand a general simplified model of how the brain works. So if this next little move works, I will show you a copy of the model. And okay, now this is a model of how the brain works. That to understand it a little bit, you kind of got to know some basic neuroanatomy. If you took your skill saw and you cut a circular hole in the top of somebody's skull and you looked in, you'd see this wrinkledy thing that's your brain. And you would see right down the middle is a straight line, and that separates the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere. Okay? The left hemisphere is mostly associated with language, and the right hemisphere is mostly associated with visual spatial abilities. Peculiarly, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. The right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. Okay, so when we are looking at the way the brain handles information, we start down at the bottom, okay? And that's that something happens. They're being lectured to, they're being told they should read a book, they're listening to music, something, but there's a stimulus, okay? And notice that the stimulus, every stimulus, has to go through attention to get anywhere else in the brain. If it doesn't get past here, it is not going anywhere, which explains a whole lot about your child with ADHD, because they don't have very good control over their attention. They don't have very good control over what they pay attention to. Therefore, it can't get any further. Okay, it just, like it never happened as far as they're concerned, because they weren't paying attention. That is, one of the things, good Lord, I mean, ADHD kids people think they have learning disabilities. They think they're autistic. They think they're all kinds of things, basically, primarily because they're not paying attention to what everybody else is paying attention or to what everybody else is supposed to pay attention to. Okay? That's a huge deal, because once you get through kind of the notion that everything your brain does with information has to pass through attention. And in all of us, attention is the most fragile of the cognitive functions. Being stressed out affects your attention. Being anxious affects your attention. Being depressed affects your attention. Being in pain affects your attention. Not sleeping well affects your attention. And that is what also makes diagnosing ADHD tricky. You have to rule out a whole bunch of stuff before you end up with an ADHD diagnosis. Okay, but as you can see from the model, okay, something happens out here in the world. You are paying attention to it. Now, depending if it is a verbal something or other, somebody said something, or you're reading a book or something, it goes this way over to the language side of the house, which is just told you is the left side of the brain. And from there, it can go to the various stages of memory. And memory has more stages than I've just included here, but there are a ton of models of how the brain, how memory works. But just be aware that there are in this one we just had three, which is register memory, short term, and long term memory, and it's way more complicated than that. If you think about, well, I'll tell you the simplest model. There are four different types of memory. There's what's called episodic memory, which is memory for the past. That's the good old days, and that is robust. That lasts when everything else goes away. So a lot of times people with dementia will appear to be normal because they're basically doing the same thing that they've been doing for the last 30 years. They haven't changed a thing. Every habit is being followed. So that's episodic memory. Then we have what's called procedural memory. And procedural memory is memory for for things you've been doing so long that it's basically a habit. You don't even think about doing it. That can be, as simple as tying your shoes or buttoning your shirt, to something more complicated. Maybe you have a famous chocolate chip cookie recipe that nobody else has been able to duplicate, and you've got it all up here in your memory. So it's locked in, and that also is pretty robust. That lasts for people. That even lasts for people with dementia. The problem is if they start thinking about it, then it'll screw up. Okay. And then the third one is what's called short-term memory. And short-term memory is just new memories, the ability to form new memories. That's when you're looking at, what do we want to say? What did you, when you were driving to wherever you're going to church this morning, what did you talk about in the car? That kind of thing. More recent new memories, making new memories. And that's the one that's relatively weak. And it also is the one that probably gets ADHD kids in trouble. They're sitting there in the classroom and people think that, well, she told everybody in the classroom what the assignment was, but he didn't get it. Well, why didn't he get it? It's because his attention was distracted by something else. He was somewhere else. Okay, and the last kind of memory is what's called working memory. And that working memory is just the where you don't really want to remember it. You just want to keep it in awareness till you get the job done. That's when the boss tells you he wants you to do three things and you get one of them done and you can't remember the other two. That's working memory failing. Okay, and for most folks, somewhere in middle age, working memory starts to be an issue. That's when you get up and you go from the family room to the bedroom and you can't remember why you went there. Then you go back out to the family room and all of a sudden it comes back to you. Okay, this is a little more simplified. This is just register memory, which is basically essentially working memory. And that's the first stage in learning anything. And then it goes to short-term memory, and then short-term, and when it's in short-term memory, you're comparing it to long-term memory, to similar pieces of information you've memorized. And so you compare it to the new information and you incorporate it. Okay, so a verbal or auditory stimulus goes up through the language processing centers, then it goes into the various stages of memory, and then executive functioning takes over and it makes a determination that something does need to be done or doesn't need to be done, or if you have to do anything. And then it's motor output, and motor output is just doing whatever you intended to do without any a coordinated movement to solve whatever the problem is or to take the action that was indicated. And on the visual side of the house, over here, you see something that you need to respond to, or you recognize something you need to respond to, and the same thing happens. It's processed in the visual spatial centers in the brain, which are typically on the right side of the brain. And then it goes into memory, and then it goes to executive functioning as well. And then there's the motor output. But that's, and again, remember, motor output, the left side of the body is controlled by the right side of the brain, and vice versa. So that's kind of the simplified model, okay? But you can see how important attention is. You can see how important attention is for all the rest of this stuff. Because if you are not paying attention, you're not getting any of this. Or maybe worse than that, you're only getting 10% of it. And it may not fit in with the other 90%, which is sometimes causes issues. So the whole idea is that your whole brain needs to work together. Okay. We break it down into pieces and parts because it's easier to understand that way. But it is not, well, first of all, it's everything in the brain needs to work together for you to feel normal and be normal. Okay. If one piece or one part's not working as well as the others, everything gets messed up because it's a very tightly, finely controlled sort of system. And with ADHD, by definition, you've got issues with control of attention and executive functioning. And that's all in the front part of the brain. And I'm not going to go any further into the neuroanatomy, or at least not today. But that's basically why attention is so important and causes so many problems in school, in life, for people who have ADHD. Okay, I mean it's right there at the start of everything. If it's not on when something important happens, none of this, the rest of this stuff happens, and so you're left, um, well, clueless at best, and maybe in harm's way, or maybe just irritating people. But it's not intentional. It's neurological. Okay. Control of attention is something most of us take for granted, but an ADHDer can't because they have troubles with that. It's not that they can't pay attention to some things. Some things they can pay attention like crazy, but a lot of the things, especially if it's things they're not really interested in, they have a horrible time paying attention to it. And it's not that they're trying to be rude or don't like the teacher or don't like their parents or whatever. It's just that they can't do any better. So they will persist in getting into a lot of trouble, basically. I mean, I think I've told you over and over again that research suggests that on average, an ADHD kid gets 70 critical comments every day. And that's basically because of this piece. We're not paying attention to what's going on. Okay? And that's what causes all the problems. Because without this piece working well, the whole rest of this is useless. You can't do anything with it. And that's why a lot of times people think their kid isn't smart because he keeps getting low grades in school or she gets low grades in school. And they think, well, I thought he was smart, but he's getting terrible grades. Remember, getting good grades is mostly about paying attention and being persistent. Past that, and compliant, of course. Past that, it's got nothing to do with brilliance, nothing to do with how super smart you are. It's got everything to do with, do you do what you're told reasonably efficiently? Okay, that is my shot for today. Sorry about being a little late, but I am sure I have a reputation for my technology foibles. Um, so we will catch you next time. In the meantime, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD page. And we're the show that tries to make the world safe for ADHDers because we need them. We need people who think outside the box. Compliant thinkers are really good at maintaining the system, but they aren't really very good at solving the problems in the system. People who think outside the box are the people who solve those problems. And your child, because he or she has ADHD, is an outside the box thinker. So cherish that and raise the heck out of it, okay? We'll catch you next time.